the 7th degree. The triad on the 7th degree, the diminished triad, requires special consideration. Its structure is different from that of the other triads we have seen, which all have at least one thing in common, the perfect fifth. The triad on the 7th degree has a diminished fifth. Such a fifth is not found among the closer overtones, and is therefore heard as a dissonance. That the dissonance requires special treatment, and for what reasons, I stated previously when I discussed its appearance among successive tones, that is, in melodic movement, 2 consecutive fifths or fourths in the same direction. Clearly, the dissonance is still more striking whenever its tones appear simultaneously. The listener can fail to hear a dissonance produced by tones that follow one another, should he, for example, forget the pertinent preceding tone. Dissonance produced by tones sounding together he cannot fail to hear. How dissonances ever came to be used at all is open only to conjecture. It must have happened quite gradually, and the attempt to mingle the more remote overtones, the dissonances, with the consonances must have been undertaken at first just occasionally and with great caution. I imagine that at first the dissonances were simply made to rush by, as it were, more or less this way, over a sustained triad, C, E, G. A melodic voice slid down, so to speak, from a long G through an extremely fleeting F to a long E. Something like a more or less fully executed portamento or glissando, colloquially schmearen, a smear or glide, whose individual tones are hardly distinguishable. We have a star here. It should be noted here that music, too, has a colloquial form, which could serve as a source of evidence in explaining the historical development, much the same as folk speech does for the written language, namely, folk music. For it, too, contains alongside the peculiar products of its own development musical conventions of earlier times. And one should also examine and reappraise the banalities and trivialities. For the most part, these will not turn out as really vulgar, but as worn out by use and antiquated, hackneyed, as dilettantes like to say. Later on, we're back upstairs now, one of these tones may have become fixed as a scale tone. Thus, I believe that dissonance appeared first in passing from one tone to another through intervening tones, and that such passing stemmed from the portamento, from the desire to soften leaps, to connect disjunct tones melodically, in this case by scale step. That this desire coincides with another, with the desire to make use also of the more distant overtones, is perhaps only a fortunate coincidence, such as historical evolution indeed often produces. Perhaps, however, it is all the same principle, the portamento being one of the forms in which it is realized. The portamento could also be, like the scale, a horizontal rearrangement of the overtone series. If the ear has stopped in midstream, if it has not chosen those dissonant overtones that actually make up a tone, but stylized and tempered average tones instead, then that can be explained as a compromise between an end and its attainability, as I suggested before in discussing the origin of the scale. The use of such ornamentation as touched upon dissonant tones was allowed in the form of the so-called Manierian ornaments, was indeed almost demanded by the taste of the time. We have footnote 1 here. CF CPE Bach, Essay on the True Art of Playing Keyboard Instruments. The Manierian ornaments or embellishments, they connect and enliven tones and impart stress and accent. Expression is heightened by them. Without them, the best melody is empty and ineffective. In Schoenberg's view, Manierian, whatever it is, have had a more profound function in music. He considered them a main avenue through which music has evolved, through which the implicit has become explicit. So, these ornaments, back upstairs, could not be notated because the notational system had no symbols to represent them. Therefore, the figures involved, the appoggiaturas, trills, portamenti, etc., could only be propagated by tradition. As a result of their use, however, the feeling that the dissonances touched upon in these ornaments belonged to the fundamental tone may have gradually insinuated itself into the consciousness of the analyzing ear, producing the desire to fix in the notation at least some of the more frequently occurring tones. The passing tone is, then, nothing else but a manière, as it was fixed in the notation. As the notation always lags behind the sound, not only in melody, perhaps even much more in rhythm, where, with the compulsion of the bar line, the written symbols are often hardly even approximately correct. So, the notation of these ornaments is of course also imperfect if judged by the sounds composers surely imagined. It can be understood, however, as one of those simplifications the human intellect must create if it is to deal with the material. And we'll continue, God willing, on the top of page 48.